How do and welcome back. My name is Andrew Hancock and I'm a VMware technical architect from Yorkshire in the United Kingdom. I have worked with the VMware products since their inception in 1998, so that's 23 years I've been working with the VMware product line. Some of you may say if you cut Andy in half it reads VMware like a stick of rock from Blackpool. I've also written over 100 articles for Experts Exchange and won many other awards and accolades. I am honoured to have been accepted into the VMware vExpert program for the last 11 years and more recently a VMware vExpert Pro for the last 2. Welcome back to Hancock's VMware Half Hour, and today is a very special day. In the next 30 minutes we're actually going to show you how to create your first Windows virtual machine on your VMware vSphere hypervisor. If you've been following along in the parts, in part 1 we actually basically installed our ESX 7.0.2a, sorry 7.0.2 on our Dell R730 server. In part 2 we actually connected to the server. In parts 3 I actually showed you how to create an ISO. In part 4 I showed you how to upload it. In part 5 I showed you how to enable SSH, and in part 6 I showed you how to dismiss those notifications. And today in part 7 is where we actually start getting jiggy with it. As I promised you when I was just off-piste a little bit in the last 4 videos that I've done about actually updating our host server to 7.02a. So today in the next 30 minutes I'm actually going to show you how I install a Windows virtual machine. And along the way I'm going to actually basically give you some tips and to avoid some pitfalls as how we proceed. So let's see how we go. Now you may remember, if you've been following this series, in, let me see, part 3 we created the ISO of our Windows Server 2019 and our Ubuntu 20.04. And then in part 4 we actually basically uploaded those ISOs to our server, because I turned around and said to you that we were going to, sooner or later, we were going to get round to actually creating virtual machines. And of course that's what VMware vSphere Hypervisor 7 is all about. It's a type 1 bare metal hypervisor that allows us to create and run virtual machines. Not emulate them, actually run them. Emulation is something very, very different. When we're actually installing virtual machines on ESXi, the actual guest virtual machines actually access the real CPU of the host. It's not emulated, we actually access the real CPU of the host. So, a little bit of waffle, a little out of the way. I'll try and stop saying the word basically, but maybe we'll have a little competition and you can add up the number of basically or basic that I actually basically say in this video. So we've already connected to our ESXi host server. Of course this is our PowerEdge R730 by Dell. This is our Dell PowerEdge R730. We've updated it now to 7.0U2A, and I've actually basically created 4 videos to show you how we can do that. There are 4 different ways that we can actually do that, from ISO upgrade to bash shell, downloading direct from VMware, uploading the patch file, the upgrade file to a data store, or using Lifecycle Manager. So we've covered that in 4 videos. But today I'm actually going to concentrate on creating the virtual machine. And I've been quite excited because I've been wanting to get to this part for a while now. But I actually basically wanted to set all the groundwork along the way in the previous 6 videos, parts 1 to 6, before we actually basically get to this point. So, okay, I'm just going to check that, I'm just going to actually have a little look on our data store, just to check that the ISO is still there. So that's a good start. So you may remember that we actually uploaded these ISOs in part 4. So, how do we create a virtual machine? Well, quite simply, we select host and we select create register virtual machine, and we follow the wizard. But really all the wizard does And some people have asked me this question, and we've had a few questions raised on Experts Exchange. This just creates a blank canvas, if you like, a configuration of how many processors, how much RAM, how much storage, and what network interface and what storage controller we're going to use. It isn't actually going to run. We still need to do some changing and inserting of CDs to do a standard installation. So we just really follow the wizard. So I want to create a new virtual machine, and I'm going to click next. Type a name for a virtual machine. I'm following along the article that I've already created at Experts Exchange, and if you actually basically like to follow some guidelines, some written guidelines, there's a step-by-step tutorial with screenshots here. So in this article, I think I actually basically called it my first virtual Windows machine. Now, if you're going to put spaces in your virtual machine names, you may actually basically get into issues later on when you actually basically try changing into folders, etc. So if you can avoid spaces, it's probably easier later on navigating the bash shell. So I'm going to preach what I'm saying, and I'm going to basically say my first virtual machine, my first Windows virtual machine. It can be any name you like. Just remember that, of course, this is the name that appears in the inventory of the host. This is not the OS guest name in the operating system. This is just a friendly name for your virtual machine. We're actually, if you want to basically make the virtual machine backward compatible with previous versions of ESX, then you've got the option to do that here. Obviously, at the moment, our environment is now 7.0 U2 in all the VMs in the lab here that we're going to use in these tutorials. So I'm actually basically going to go with the compatibility. This is also called the virtual machine hardware version. It doesn't say that there, it just says compatibility, but this is the virtual machine hardware version. I'm going to select the guest OS family. Obviously it's Windows, and I'm going to select the version, and that is going to be Windows Server 2019 64-bit. Now, we have seen some questions in Experts Exchange if you're using slightly older versions of ESX. It may not necessarily have the version of the operating system that you're using. Now, one of the things that you do need to check, which is actually basically stated in my article here, that you want to check to see that the operating system that you are installing is certified for the operating system that you're using. And you do this by using the VMware Compatibility Guide, HCL Hardware Compatibility List. So you can actually basically select Guest OS. You can select ESX because that's the version that we're using, 702. We can scroll down to Microsoft and we can select our operating system, Windows Server 2019. Click Update and View Results, and it will actually basically show us that Windows Server 2019 64-bit is a supported release on ESXi 7.02. It's worth doing that check beforehand. Sometimes in late versions of the ESXi release, you may not have the Windows Server version or the Ubuntu version, but if you actually basically pick, for instance, Windows Server 2016, it's probably not really going to vary a lot between the configuration that's being recommended. And really what this Guest OS version does is that the VMware ESXi software tries to sort of kind of best guess what components you actually basically need in the OS. But that's not really fixed, and I'll show you that in a minute now. So it then asks us basically what storage we want to use. So we're going to use this ESX007 _ local 1 _ VMFS6, which is our flash data store, which we created in part 2. And I'm going to click next. Now, this is where basically you can actually specify the requirements for your virtual machine. Now, before you even start basically getting jiggy with the wizard and installing virtual machines, you've probably got a rough idea of what requirements that you have for it. So these requirements really are based on that custom selection we made for Windows Server 2019. So it's guessing really that we want 4 gig of RAM, we want a 90 gig hard disk, we want 2 CPUs, and I'll come back to that in a minute. We want a SCSI controller, we want USB 3.1, we want a network adapter, host CD device, etc. So you can change these. My advice with disks is start off with a small disk. 90 gig, fine, but don't go mad just because you've got a 6 terabyte data store. Don't go crazy and say I'll have a 6 terabyte data store. First of all, the data store basically needs to accommodate snapshots. We'll talk about that later. It needs to accommodate the swap file for the VM, and it also needs to basically contain an overhead as well. So even if you've got a 6 terabyte data store, you can't create a 6 terabyte virtual machine because you'll not be able to power it on. It's always easier to grow a virtual machine disk than it is to shrink it. So start small, grow on demand. And we'll come to that in another video showing you how can you expand easily your data stores. The same with memory. Start small and grow. I would not recommend the use of hot add or hot CPU anymore, because that changes the vNUMA configuration within the host. So avoid it if you can, and very few operating systems actually reliably support hot add anyway. CPUs. Now, this has changed over the years. Once upon a time we were selecting sockets over cores, and we were only allocating cores if we had a licensing restriction. However, vSphere ESX 6.5, 6.7 and 7.0 have now got a lot better allocating CPUs on the scheduler. So the recommendation now is to allocate cores per sockets and not sockets. So it's already basically by default effectively telling me 2 CPUs as 2 virtual CPUs in our guest OS, which is 2 cores per socket. So if I wanted 4 CPUs, then I would do 4 cores times 1 socket. There's the enable CPU hot add. Avoid if you can. So for this simple, I'm going to basically, I want 2 CPUs in the virtual machine, which is 2 cores. Now networking. If you look at networking, you will see the adapter type is the E1000E. There are drivers already included in Windows operating systems for the E1000E driver. It's not the best driver to use with a Windows operating system. The better driver to use is the VMXNet 3 driver. However, there's no driver in the base ISO for this selection. So if you go ahead and install it, you'll find you've got no networking. So what we'll do, we will install the basic virtual machine, basic Windows virtual machine, using the E1000E, and later we'll do a switcheroonie and we'll switch it when we look at installing VMware tools for Windows on our virtual machine. So quickly, those really are all the options that we want. Now, we're not installing the OS yet. All we're actually doing is really creating the configuration container that we're going to install our OS into. So there's the name, there's the data store we're going to install it in, there's the guest OS name, its hardware version, virtual hardware version. It's going to have 2 vCPUs, 4 gig of RAM, 1 network adapter based on E1000E. It's going to use a LSI Logic SAS storage controller and an IDE controller for the CD-ROM drive. And I'm going to click finish. And very quickly that should create a virtual machine for us. There we go, my first virtual machine. Ignore that machine there, that's Runcast Analyzer from my friends Runecast. I can't even say it, Runecast. That's the Runecast Analyzer, and I'm going to do a little video on that later on from my friends over at Runecast. It's a great product and there are trials available for you to use that, but come back later and I'll do a little bit of video about that and how that works, so don't get confused about there at the moment. Okay, so first thing we need to do is we need to attach that CD-ROM or that DVD to this virtual machine. So I'm going to click Edit Settings, and I'm going to go down to the CD-ROM drive, and I'm going to select Data Store ISO, and I'm going to double click, and I'm going to highlight our ISO that we uploaded in part 4, and I'm going to click select. I'm going to click select. Now, before you click save, make sure that you've ticked the box that says connect, and also connect at power on. There are many questions on Experts Exchange that people creating virtual machines for the first time forget those options. They power the virtual machine on, and basically they either get a missing operating system message or they just get a flashing cursor because they've forgotten to actually basically allocate the boot device to the CD-ROM to boot the media. So I'm going to click save. So now I'm going to click power on, and hopefully if I've done everything right and I've followed my article, we should get, and if you just double click, and again I was too slow there, you know, you probably just noticed that it said press any key to boot from the CD, and basically again too slow. So what we can do, basically we can say guest OS, send keys, Control Alt Delete, and this time I hit enter. Now this procedure is exactly the same to what you would have seen installing Server 2019 or any Windows operating system on a physical PC or a Type 2 hypervisor, but quite simply we just basically are going to select the settings. So I'm in the United Kingdom, and I'm going to click next, and I'm going to say install now. Now it is a while since I've done this. I very rarely actually install, and I don't have a product key, so I'm just going to say I don't have a product key, and it's going to ask me what to install, but I'll come back to that in a minute. I very rarely these days actually basically insert ISOs into a server and create virtual machines. If you're clever and if you're smart, you only have to basically install your operating system once from a DVD, because later on we'll use templates in vCenter Server to rapidly deploy or quickly deploy virtual machines based on our template, and I'll cover that in another part. So we actually basically want to install our server, and again, a couple of tips. There's a few people basically that ask questions and say I've got no GUI. on my Windows Server Standard. Why is this? Quite simply because you didn't actually select desktop experience, posh word for GUI, when you did the installation. So make sure you actually basically install the correct version. So I'm going to install Windows Server 2019 Standard Desktop Experience, i.e. it's got a GUI. And I'm going to click Next. And I'm going to scroll down and have a little look at all that. Yeah, I accept the terms of license, and I'm going to click Accept the Terms, and I'm going to click Next. I'm going to click Custom Install, Windows Only, Advanced, and I'm just going to click Next. Word about partitions, don't use them. If you need to create a D drive, don't partition up your existing disk. Create and add another disk, and create one partition per disk. It makes expansion of disks a lot easier than if you're really messing around with legacy partitions. And click Next. And okay, here we go. Then basically this is the sort of thing, I'm sure you've seen this before. So while it's actually basically doing this, I'm just going to disappear. I'm going to speed this up in post edit, rather than me waffling on while you watch installing Windows. So I'll be back shortly. Sorry, I'm back. I disappeared onto another computer actually, basically to look at some look at some posts on Experts Exchange, and I hadn't actually anticipated that it's sitting there waiting for me to do something. Anyway, so enter a complex password. And obviously click Finish. And there we go. We really are done. That's really how simple it is. So I'm basically just going to select Guest OS, Send Keys, Control Alt Delete, and I'm going to, can't even remember the password now. I'm just going to log in. And I'm just going to basically just show you a couple of things. Yes, we want to connect to that LAN. Thank you. What I wanted to show you really was, let's just go to About. Okay, what I actually really wanted to show you, I wanted to show you the processor. That's an Intel Xeon CPU E5-2690V3, which is exactly the same as what's in the host. So it's not emulated. It is actually basically touching and using the real processor, and it's using 4 gigs. And if I actually basically just bring up Send Keys, Control Alt Delete, and bring up Task Manager and say more details and performance, then basically we can actually see there's 1 socket and 2 virtual processors that are running, and the speed is 2.6 gig. And just to sort of kind of demonstrate that we do have networking available and all is well, I'm just actually basically going to kick off, check for updates, because obviously I think I saw May 2019 possibly, dated on the ISO that we're using here. So the content of the ISO is going to be out of date, but easily remedied if we basically just hit the button, check for updates, and that's obviously going to go off to Microsoft and pull all those down and install them. So that's it in this very short video as to how we create our first Windows virtual machine. And come back in what is part 8, and we'll talk about VMware tools for Windows, what it is, what it does, and how to install it. So I hope you have enjoyed this video. Endorse it, thumbs up. I'll put the steps in the steps below, and I'll put links to the article that I've created if you actually basically want to follow a step-by-step tutorial with screenshots. If there's anything that I missed or if I was going too fast, but it's all there. But if you do have any related questions about this, then please post them on Experts Exchange, and we'll get them answered for you. So again, thanks so much for watching. All the best and goodbye.